program is made possible through the generous support of Syngenta Seeds NK brand, the results you need, the freedom to choose. And by Farms.com, ag news, market prices, ag careers, and farm real estate. You'll find it all at Farms.com. In Ontario, an organization called OnTrace AgriFood Traceability has been working since 2006 to help create a plan for emergency response situations as well as support business models and developing market access. Brian Sterling is the Chief Executive Officer of OnTrace AgriFood Traceability and joins us here today. Thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Well, thank you for having me, Kevin.
As always, we don't have a ton of time, so let's get right to this. First of all, what is OnTrace?
Yeah, OnTrace is an industry-led, not-for-profit corporation that has been given the mandate, if you will, for leading traceability initiatives in Ontario, and really has two objectives, as you stated in your introduction. We're looking at improving the ability of industry and government to respond to emergencies, whether they're animal health or weather-related, or what have you, and also to help industry become more innovative and competitive by using traceability.
Now, when you go, I assume you're selling this to the supply chain, producers, retailers, everyone in there. When you talk to the industry, what are the benefits you talk about here?
The benefits of traceability really fall into about 3 or 4 major categories, and it kind of helps me think them through when I think of them that way. And the one obvious one that most people talk about is the ability to better respond to an emergency. So whether that's a product recall or whether it's an animal health issue, that's an obvious one that most people kind of jump to right away. But there are 3 others that we kind of look at as well. And one is improving the ability of a business to manage its supply chain. So if you think about the automotive industry, for instance, or say pharmaceuticals, they would not be able to be as effective at what they do if they didn't really know where precisely the ingredients or the components that they need to produce their products are. So supply chain management for agriculture could be medicines or the feed that they use for the animals or the materials that they put on their fields. Mm-hmm. So traceability can help with that. The second one would be reducing the cost of a recall in the event of a recall, or the risk of a recall, because you now have a better control over where things are and when you've shipped them and that kind of thing. And then the third one, which is the one that I know that your 2 previous guests were talking about, are around the notion of branding and quality. The equity of the brand is supported by traceability, and that's something that we're seeing a lot more interest in now.
Now, you've been talking about what I will call, I guess, strategic and big picture type benefits, mitigating risk and those types of things. When I think it from a producer's perspective, maybe a retailer's perspective, I'm assuming when they do a cost benefit, it's about return on investment. I assume that makes it a harder sell, because when you talk about those types of risk, I think of, oh man, those are catastrophic things, and that's not my problem, is it? I mean, is that a common refrain?
Yeah, we usually hear 3 kind of concerns from producers, farmers in particular. One is obviously the cost, right? What's the cost benefit of this particular program to me, to my particular business? I understand what we're trying to do around emergency management, but how is this going to help my business? The other 2 are the questions around liability and privacy of information, of course. But around the cost question, it becomes one of, are you investing for the long term in your business, or are you simply trying to get cash? Mm-hmm. And so what we try to do is to encourage people to look at their business as something that they invest in anyway. Mm-hmm. And this is another consideration for investment. But I'll be the first one to say that, for small and mid-size producers, this looks a lot like cost, and it's difficult for them to see through to the actual benefit they might get from, say, improving the branding that they have around a product.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've done some partnerships with, tell me about the partnership you've done with corn-fed beef, for instance. How's that working?
That's a really interesting one, Kevin. Corn-fed beef has got a pretty good brand in Ontario. They're well recognized, and they do an excellent job of marketing that brand. And what they're trying to do now is to expand that recognition and obviously sales at the marketplace. They've realized that they've got very good control over a certain aspect of the production of that product, if you will, and that's at the feedlot level. What they now want to do is they want to be able to create a program where they can actually follow the product all the way from the breeder to the store shelf so that they can, with a high level of certainty, tell consumers that this is Ontario product. It either didn't leave Ontario, or it was fed only Ontario corn, or those kinds of things. And so in order to be able to do that, they have to put in a traceability program that will convince people that they have that control. This is very different than emergency management. This is really all about brand equity, and it's an exciting program we've been working with them on for some time now.
When you talk about brand equity, there's one thing to build a brand. There's something else to protect a brand. Is traceability? How do you define this in terms of moving forward? Is this really going to be simply the cost of doing business going forward? In other words, if we don't have it, we will simply be denied access to certain markets? Or is there a cost benefit that I will actually, I know you can't do it black and white in every case, but how do you see it?
I do see it as a little bit of black and white. There's certainly an aspect to this that it is the cost of doing business, or it is becoming the cost of doing business. If we look back over, and I've been working on traceability now for not too long, I guess about 6 years. If I look back over that period of time, it's almost like clockwork. You can set your watch by it. Every few months, the consumer gets another reason to question the food that they're eating, right? And so recently we had the issue with listeriosis, and then in the fall we had an issue in Ireland around pork being contaminated with dioxin. And now we're dealing with a salmonella outbreak in the United States with peanut butter, right? So that is starting to really gain the attention of consumers, and so consumers are really actually starting to get concerned. And if you look at some of the recent surveys, the level of concern is kind of alarming. So that's kind of the cost of doing business. If you're an exporter, or if you're shipping your product for someone else to use, it is actually starting to become mandatory for a lot of the European countries that you have these kind of systems in place. So that's the mandatory aspect of this. And I think what we need to try and do is, as an organization, try to support those that want to take that step forward by also showing them the other benefit that they can get. Again, around supply chain management, can you reduce the cost of your inventory? Around risk and recall management, can you actually improve your insurance rates?
Any evidence out there that consumers will pay for this?
That's a really tough one to answer. Yes and no. I would say from the perspective of food safety, consumers want to know that the food is safe. They want to know that if you say it's Ontario grown, that it is in fact grown in Ontario. Those are kind of non-negotiable, and I don't think a consumer, perhaps rightly, would expect to pay more for that. Where they will pay more is if you somehow differentiate your product from someone else's. And of course, obvious examples are things like organic products, or things like the corn-fed beef program, where you have a very unique value proposition that the consumer is prepared to pay. Pick a number, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting, because a point that you just made, and I noticed that it was in your blog the other day, there was a Denver-based research company that had determined that for the first time, food safety and traceability were greater consumer concerns than other food purchases, with the exception, even more than price, it said. So there's a trend that you may be right in that.
And some of that, people would say, well, that's kind of knee-jerk reaction, but when something moves from being basically off the radar screen entirely, I think the year before the statistics were it was like number 14 or something like that, and now it's number 2, that indicates that there is a significant shift in consumer attitude. And what we say to producers and to government is, this is not going to go away. I have a lot of conversations with producers, and I have meetings with producer organizations, their general meetings and so forth, and I look at them and I say, hands up who thinks that this is going away. And really, when people reflect on it, very few people think that this is an issue that's going to die.
Interesting. Well, and it's an issue, there's a lot more to this, and obviously we don't have time to cover all, but I appreciate you spending some time to speak with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much again, Kevin.
And those producers who are interested, by the way, to know more can go to the website. It is simply OnTrace AgriFood.com.